Hello and welcome. We are here with Dave Partridge to talk about his magazine, Shadows of Your Mind. Dave, could you introduce yourself in a few words? Why did you start this magazine? What was your main interest in the topic?
Yeah, sure. If people have heard me speak about the origin before, it's stemmed from a lifetime interest in UFOs. Dipped into the subject now and again, but it wasn't until I started working at my current employment and I met two guys who started asking me questions about UFOs and Coast to Coast and Fate of Black and all those other shows. And my interest kind of peaked from that. I started reading a load of books, listening to podcasts, listening to YouTube channels, watching documentaries a lot, and to try and make sense of what I was listening to and reading. I wanted to put it in I wanted to make notes first. I wanted to create a UFO wiki, but realized that would be a fool's errand. There was no way that one man could take on a project that big, but I've got a background in magazine design. And so I thought, well, I'll just use my, what skills I have in that sector and produce a magazine, see what happens, and share it around, see if people like it. And luckily, they did.
I haven't thought about it, but a wiki UFO is a good idea.
It is
It's
a
a
good
lot
idea.
of work. It's a lot of work, but it's a good idea.
You'd have to be careful about what you include in there as well, and be strict on who can contribute to it, because you don't want, some of the less reputable people coming along and editing entries, pushing their narrative, which is something that happened to the ill-fated On Stellar social media platform.
Yes, I have ties with the SPR in London, and they had the same trouble with the classical Wikipedia, and there were wars among contributors to correct each sentence. So at the end, they published their own Wikipedia with their own contributors. So, but I haven't thought about it in a UFO point, and it's really a good idea at that time, because there is there's just more people interested in that topic, so you can have a bigger contribution source.
Yeah, it's something myself and a few colleagues over at UAP Media UK have been, bouncing about, is the fact that you got more people coming to the subject now because of all the mainstream media coverage. People are familiar with the Nimitz event, the Princeton event. They know about the New York Times reports, the UAPTF report as well. But what people necessarily don't know about is what came before 2004, and also what happened between 2017 and today. I mean, let's say going back to 2014, 15, when I started getting back into it, I was just flicking through some of my early issues today, and I couldn't believe the level of naivety about the subject that was in those first few issues. Because basically, I believed everybody when I started looking into it. I thought it was great. I thought, oh my God, there's all these different species out there. There's all these different craft. You got William Tompkins, who said he worked for Douglas and built basically battleship carriers in space, or designed them anyway. And then as I started going through, speaking with people and reading up more and listening to more, you kind of work out who's genuine and who's not. And I think that's a stumbling block that people come across when they first get into this topic. And yeah, like a basic UFO 101, what is UFO? What is ufology? What is UFO Twitter? What are the main celebrated cases, and what are the pitfalls that you can avoid as you get into this subject? I think that's something that, someone can put that together, someone like Bryce Sable, or with his On the Trail of the Sources blog on Medium, or some of the old researchers who have been in this game a long time, they can possibly point the new people to the credible information rather than everyone just going in and, it's good to make your own mistakes, but at the same time, it's good to have your hand held at times as well.
Yeah, and there are several modalities of doing it. You can have a review committee that supervise modifications to articles, and you have ways of controlling what information is published or not. And I think it's a very interesting idea for another initiative. I think you should look into that in depth.
Yeah, I
Because
was
the main interest I can see is the power of norm. You could create a standard upon everybody could agree on what is the minimal point of knowledge on that topic, and then everybody can do and make his own research and learn what he wants. But I think as a normative tool, that would be very interesting on that topic.
Yeah, it's something I've been looking at including in the magazine as well, is kind of like an introduction to the subject, almost like a glossary or an appendix of the main researchers, the main people, the main events, the main terminology, so that people can just guide themselves around the subject without having to think, oh my God, what are the Wilson Davis documents, or what is Roswell, what is Rendlesham, what is the Aztec crash all about, what is you could go the other way and say, what is the Black Knight satellite? And then because I did a feature on the top 10 hoaxes, because I don't just deal with ufology and shadows of your mind. I deal with I like to feature like paranormal, ancient history, and cryptids as well when I get the chance. And I did a top 10 hoaxes feature back in issue 4, I think, and we covered quite a few different subjects in that, so that was good to get my teeth into.
I agree. The topic of the day is ufology, because the United States is pushing the wagon forward at full speed, we could say, compared to the past decades. But I have also similar interest in other subjects that are, for me, more interesting, but it's my personal opinion.
Yeah, with these other subjects as well, you find parallels with ufology. I mean, you can find clues as well, especially when you're looking at the paranormal.
Yes, and
you're thinking about like apports and dimensions, and are poltergeists kind of like dimensional slips, where we're talking about interdimensionals, or there's just so much out there that it's getting more and more difficult to separate and pigeonhole the different facets of what we're looking at these days.
And the main problem with ufology is that the object of study is very hard to get your hands on. In other parts of research, you can just use on your table, you can make an experiment and check if it's true or not, which is not possible with ufology. So it requires much more heavy machinery to investigate.
Yeah, I mean, the scientific method, the unidentified aerial phenomena is not a repeatable experiment. We have no way of repeating that because we don't understand what's going on ourselves yet. We can't possibly hope to recreate that at this present moment. I mean, steps are being made to try and do that.
The problem isn't really that, because in repetition of experimentation is required in almost most fields of science, but not all of them. You have, for example, cosmology. We only have one universe, so we can't repeat our universe to study it. So there are other methods to investigate scientifically without repetition. The problem with ufology is that the object is actually evading you. So that's really pissing me off personally, because
yeah, fair point. I mean, you can't just stand on Catalina Island with a big sign saying "slow down," can you?
Yeah. So I was reading most issues of Shadows of Your Mind, and I've noticed that almost all articles could be a Wikipedia page. And I, when you that's why I reacted so much to the Wikipedia analogy you used, because when you read, I was counting in my head the amount of hours it takes just to create that, and I was that's just insane. For anyone who has made a magazine in his life, just look at the time it took to pull that off. And I was really, really amazed when I first read it, because it's an amount of work just insane. That's just insane.
It is,
How do you manage that?
I don't. Plain and simple, I don't. I mean, when I first started it, I wanted it to be a bi-monthly magazine, available free online, which it still is. But I found that I had articles submitted by writers. That's my own fault for asking people to submit articles. But I found that I was increasing the number of pages. So bi-monthly became every 10 weeks. And then, it got really difficult towards the end of issue 6. And I just needed a total break from it, because issue 6, there was a lot of work that went into a couple of features. And I just had enough. And the UFO community at the time wasn't brilliant. There was a lot of infighting. There was a lot of nasty people making threats towards various people online. I just needed a complete break. And then because of coronavirus and the global pandemic and the global lockdown, as we've seen a lot of podcasts pop up, like that UFO podcast and Project Human, and Invisible Void, people have had time to dedicate themselves to something, instead of sitting around or redecorating your house for the 16th time. And I had a load of interviews left over, so I just thought, okay, I'll put those together and I'll do a one-off issue just to say, right, this is everything I've got. So that was the issue with Richard Dolan and Mary Rodwell in it. And, people liked it. So I thought, okay, I'll do another one, and then another one. And then issue 9 and 10, I think, went over 100 pages each. And they took, they took a while to do.
And it's very impressive, because I'm in relation with most organizations about serious organization about ufology and research. These organizations have hundreds of members. They can't pull that off. That level of writing and that level of editing is just unattainable for them. So it's really impressive to see that at a citizen initiative.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate everyone who reads it and interacts with me and, follows me on social media. I wouldn't do it if people didn't like it, basically. I probably just do a blog or something like that, just something to keep my interest in. But because people read it, and because, people are always asking, oh, when's the next issue coming out? What's in the next issue? I'll quite happily carry on. I mean, next issue we have Chase Kletsky guest editing. So I've been collaborating with her on a few things, and that's going to be a really good issue, because we have an interview with Bryce Sable in there.
Oh, cool. Good writer too.
He talks about dark skies. He talks about the UAPTF report, the disclosure movement, and after disclosure, because he wrote the book after disclosure with Richard Dolan, he talks a bit about that and where we see ourselves now, and how his book relates to what we're going through with the official recognition of the United States government about the UFO subject. So that's going to be a really good interview, and there's a few other things we've got in the pipeline. One thing that I'm going to do is a feature on the female researchers of ufology, because it's predominantly a male-led research subject, and I think female researchers, they have more, if not, well, sorry, not more, they have a voice. We shouldn't. This is the 21st century. We shouldn't be separating between male and female researchers. Everybody's a UFO researcher. So I'm going to be doing a feature and speaking to a few people who've been in and around the subject for a number of years.
That's just great. I'm very impressed, to be honest, by the amount of work that is being pulled off. It's really impressive.
Sorry?
How would you define your line, your editorial line? What do you define can fit inside Shadows of Your Mind? What can't?
To be honest, if I believe it, then it usually goes in. If I think it's credible, then I will gladly publish it after I've done some research on it. Obviously, I will do some article exchanges with other publications as well, like the cross-promotion thing. So Phenomena Magazine, I work closely with. Outer Limits, I'll feature, whatever they've got coming up, whether it's a conference or their back issues or something like that. And X Times, which is an Italian publication, we've swapped articles now and again. But coming from the magazine design background in the UK, I've worked for two of the biggest magazine publishers on a variety of different titles. So I've worked with a number of different art directors as well. So I took different styles from everything I've ever worked on. And most magazine teams, they have, 5 or 6, 7 people working on an issue.
Yes.
And that's just a monthly magazine as well. So, for me to be doing this by myself is not only a labor of love, but it's a challenge as well. Seeing how hard I can push myself, not only to learn about the subject, but to get information out there to the people. And for them to share, because the magazine's always been about sharing information, which is why it's free.
Yes.
I mean, I could charge for it. I probably should have charged for it. I'd be very comfortable by now. But I just wanted that information to be made freely available so people could have, anyone could have access to it.
But we can say that people can support you by making donations on the website.
Yeah, there's a link to buy me a coffee. I mean, that's only a recent thing as well. Some people do, and it's I thank them very much. It's nice. It's nice to have that support as well, because when I'm working like till 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, I do need that coffee. So it is nice when people just drop me a line as well saying, oh, they found the magazine through such and such podcast, or they heard me speaking to somebody else, or someone else recommended the magazine to them. And it's for them to show their support and just drop me a message saying thanks so much for doing it. That means more to me than I suppose if it was published by an autonomous company.
That's why I wanted to have you first on that new series with Citizen Initiative, because that work is really impressive. I just have enough experience in graphic design to know how much time it takes to achieve that, and on 88 pages, it's just insane. It's just tens of hours just to put things together. It's very impressive. I've noticed that you almost each time have a relation to the how can we say that? mass culture, movies, series. How do
Yeah.
you define the relation you have between fiction and facts inside your magazine?
Well, I guess through truth through fiction has always been one of the adages of ufology. Where whether a production company or a writer has had little bits of information slipped to them to include in their work. I mean, that's something I find fascinating. When you get books like Majestic by Willie Strieber, sorry. That was said to be based on James Forrestal's diaries about, one of the occupants of the Roswell crash was alive, and if there were in fact bodies within that source set or whatever it was, and he was taken to this grave was taken to a secret facility, and they were trying to communicate using using psychic methods, so remote viewing and the kind of things they were doing at Stanford Research Institute with Russell Targ, Hal Puthoff, and Ingo Swann. But I think, as we're seeing in modern day film blockbusters, there's a lot more information that could come from some government agency somewhere. I mean, if you look at the film Battleship, which was released a few years ago with Liam Neeson,
Yes, I remember.
That kind of had USOs and these giant craft that came up from under the ocean and started, starting threatening the US Navy, which, it's not too dissimilar.
Recently we had the not testimony, but narration by Louis Elizondo of an object the size of an island that suck up a missile, and it's really a reminder of the film The Abyss.
Yeah,
so it's really interesting to have this relation, and we of course third type encounters in English. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember, Close Encounters obviously had
Close Encounters
Hynek as a consultant on there, and he had a cameo in there. And there was a character based on Jacques Vallée. And from that film, you had the Project Serpo book and tapes, which were fabricated, but it was kind of like, it was almost an indirect sequel to Close Encounters, that whole Project Serpo kind of thing.
I think it's a really interesting approach, because most of your rivals, if we can call that, are very peculiar of defining what is true and what is not. And so they can talk about fiction, but in my experience, fiction is just the best way to spread information. So if you want people to know something, just create a story about it and it spread like wildfire. I think I understand it's like a trauma, because it has been overused by sci-fi to use saucers and extraterrestrials, but it's because it was used by sci-fi that it spread around the globe on that modern appearance. In other times, it was included inside mythology. Today, it's included inside mass culture. I think it's a fertile war to just protest against fictionalization of that topic.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what the Marvel studios are doing at the moment, throughout their films, was it 23 and counting, I think, and their 3 TV series, they're always dropping in little bits of information that us in the ufology community can recognize immediately, whereas the general public who aren't quite so aware will be looking at it and go, oh, that's, it'll make them think a bit more. And then if they do come into the subject, they'll see kind of like the similarities. I mean, there's a lot of talk about, the new Loki series, It's currently streaming, and the way it handles timelines and multiverses and all that kind of stuff that I am ill-equipped to talk about. But you can see like there's conversations popping up on Twitter where it'll just go into multi-threads with people having all these different theories and saying, "Oh, if you like this, then read this scientist or read this researcher," and it does get people talking. And hopefully these kind of films and series and ultimately books will get the younger generations interested in these sorts of topics. So I think moving forward, when we do
I agree.
when we do need to research whatever UAPs are, whether they're drones or probes or anything like that, we have people who have been brought up in this environment who have who can get off on the right foot, basically.
I agree. It's after the disinformation campaign at the Condon report, ufology specialized itself, I think, into very small communities, and it's very, very bad. It has very nasty dynamics when you do that, and you become not understandable by others. It's really a bad way of doing things. There is an interesting story in France right now. The French military just asked sci-fi book writers to imagine what would be wars in the future. And the writers said that technology went so fast that they couldn't imagine what will happen. I found that really interesting in today's times. It's new. It's like in the past 10 years, the technology just jumped ahead.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the Enigma machine that was used in Bletchley Park by Alan Turing in 1945. If you look at the size of that and how that was computing the various permutations, from the German codes, and then you look at the computers that we have today. I mean, basically, a smartphone is possibly more. Well, it could land people on the moon compared to the technology they had back in 1969, which is crazy. The fact that
it's yesterday.
It's just sitting in your pocket, and all we're doing is watching cat videos or TikTok fails. When we could be using them for so much more. I think with regards to Wars of the Future, was it Einstein who said, "I don't know about World War III, but World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones." So we have to be careful of. It's all right advancing capabilities militarily, but you have to think of what's going to be left after that.
I'm not sure about that, because since World War II, it was pretty well known that you can't have a full-scale war. It would just wreck the planet for everyone. I think there will always be deterrence means where if you hit me, I just destroy the planet, so fuck off. And it's just economic tensions and ideological tensions we will see, which will be an interesting debate. You can have ideas, war ideas. You can have conceptualization of the future that fight each other. But I don't think we will have full-scale wars like World War II. I think it was the last one at that scale. Pretty much everybody understood that we can't allow the next one. But the ideological war will be, in a sense, much more terrible if you realize that China takes control. It's a very bad future. Control everywhere, no liberties. It's other fights.
Yeah. Did you ever watch that series, Man in the High Castle?
I
Based
read
on
the
a book
books.
by Philip K. Dick. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I found that really interesting way of prophesizing humanity's future. If if the other side had won, how would people be living now? And the same with TV series like Fallen Skies. Or Colony. If there's an alien invasion, humanity ends up on the losing side. What will humanity look like after that has happened, and how will we survive?
But I don't know how the series ends, but in the books, the moral, the last part of the story, is that you can always run in front of you. If you don't have any adversary, you just fall. And as Germany conquered the whole planet, it just crumbled on itself because it had no enemies to fight on. So I think it's pretty much the world we will be living in. We will. I don't agree that the fact that new technologies is used to share silly things is a bad thing. I think it will create a homogeneous culture across the globe, and based on jokes, based on laughs, and I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, I mean, it'd be a much happier place, wouldn't it?
I think so. We need to lose a little IQ to be happy.
Yeah, I think we need more people in the higher officialdom, just to dispense with the secrecy, to share the information. I mean, do away with borders, do away with all this tribalism that's been going on, and
So
we are humans after all. We are one species. We're not different species at all. It's just share the information and let us advance technologically, spiritually, and emotionally as well.
To get back to your magazine, what would be the hardest part you encountered? What was the hardest to pull?
The hardest interview. Well, the hardest part of any issue is the transcribing of the interviews anyway. I do run it through an AI software program, but at the same time, you still have to go through it and edit it and then translate it into some sort of narrative that can be easily read and easily followed. With regard to individual interviews, there are certain interviews in the early issues which I don't necessarily regret doing, because that's where I was at that time. But there are a few interviews I certainly wouldn't do if I was doing them now. For example, John D'Souza.
No, don't. You don't need to say an example. But what is the reason behind? What make you say now I shouldn't have done that?
Nice of it.
Is that
I think
experience?
because I know more who these people are now. Whereas before, I was just happy that they wanted to speak to me. But I have a greater discernment now than I did back then. I think taking the year or so off as well, and just forgetting about the subject completely, allowed me to come back in with fresh eyes, and I could see, which were the best paths to follow, and who was the more reliable people in this field of research. So that's kind of where I am now. I'm following that trail.
That's actually my next question. The main problem I had when I started to look into ufology 3 years ago was to find reliable sources. It's just a nightmare. It's a labyrinth. Yeah. Nothing is referenced. The few works that are scientifically accurate are just buried under thousands of bullshits. Nobody wrote a single bibliography of interesting books to read and scientifically published. That just amazed me.
It is, and I think you have to question why that is as well. Is it a failure on the scientific community? Is it a failure on the authors of those books that, they didn't reference where they were getting the material from? What I've been doing personally recently is going back to the older material from the 50s and 60s and, trying to draw comparisons with what we're seeing today and seeing how those UFO researchers approached the subject. Because they didn't have the internet. They were out there, boots on the ground, driving around, miles and miles of open country in front of them just to talk to witnesses who, are often out in isolated towns or isolated villages. And there was a time when Major Donald Kehoe, back in the early 1950s, he had access to US Air Force pilots. And they were free to tell him what they were encountering in the skies over the US. But after a couple of books, the high-ranking officials at the Air Force said, where is he getting this information from? This should be classified. So they stopped the pilots from speaking about them. And from 1953 onwards, Donald Kehoe made a big point of this. He said, I was getting all this information before, and now I've been shut down by the Air Force and I can't get the information. So why is there a cover-up? And I think subsequently that started a whole new genre of UFO research books where people were looking into the government cover-up of flying saucers and UFOs at that time, rather than asking the question, what are they?
I agree. That's what I found too. It's the main reason I have difficulties convincing scientists and other researchers that it is a worthy topic. There is just so much bullshit and linked together. I mean, it's next level bullshit. It's bullshit that reference other bullshit inside it.
Yeah.
Why in the world would you do that? You destroy your own topic of research doing that. And I destroyed books by just looking at the reference and checking, is it really said that? Mm-hmm. No, it's not. And nobody did that before to check just if it's true or not. And if you ever want to publish a bibliography of trusted books and reliable sources, I can assure you everybody will spread it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you look at the books of the time as well, you had people like Howard Menzel, who was a total skeptic, and he came out with all these ridiculous theories over, about what UAPs could be or UFOs could be. And some of his explanations, from a scientific view as well, were totally implausible. I think we're seeing the same thing now with these pseudo-skeptics, analyzing 16 seconds of a video and then professing to claim they know exactly what it is without having all the information to hand. I mean, that's just a ridiculous thing to do. And how they've got the credibility that some of these people have, I've got no idea. Because say you're doing actual physical important research, you wouldn't base it on a couple of minutes video and then ignore the rest of the data that comes along with that video. You get laughed out of the laboratory, wouldn't you?
Yes. No, we share the same point of view. What would be your advice to someone who would like to start researching the topic or publishing papers like you did?
Don't do it. No, seriously, I read the older stuff first. Familiarize yourself. Get used to the topic. Get used to the old researchers. Look at how they approach their research, their investigations. Look at Hynek, look at Kehoe, Vallée, John Mack, John Keel. All those people who didn't have the benefit of the internet and all the rubbish that comes along with it. These people who are actually accessing documents, going to libraries, speaking to people firsthand rather than, quoting sources that is often second, third, or fourth hand from a blog they saw, which was recommended to them by someone's brother down the pub or whatever. Get to know the subject first before you dive into it. Because if you're just going to look at it from 2004 to 2017 and then to now, you're not going to get a good grasp of what is actually going on, and you're not going to be able to. There's no good comparison with what was seen in 2004 on the Nimitz and the Princeton to, what was seen back in the 1950s, where everyone was seeing hubcaps or pie plates, glued together. There were butane tanks and propane tanks flying around. People have referenced those. People were seeing those. People were seeing triangles, which I think is in the David Marler interview in the latest issue as well. Triangle sightings have gone back to the 50s and 60s, and not just in the US. They were seen over Poland. They were seen over the UK. They were seen, obviously, Belgium is the famous one in 80s and the late 80s and late 90s. But triangles have been seen forever.
And there are different kinds of triangles. I mean,
exactly.
It's just very simple shapes, so you can describe them the same way. But I made a long series with Julien Auder, who is part of the SOBEP, so he has access to all the archives of the Belgian wave. And he explained to me that depending on the angle of sighting, you could see a saucer, a triangle, or a cylinder. It's just a combination of the different point of view of the object. And as it's very, very rare that they bank into their motion, you just have one point of view. So description, base comparison of description just by visual appearance is very inefficient for me.
Exactly. And, some people will see an elongated cylinder. Some people, if you're seeing it side on, and some people will just see a bright dot, which could be the end of it. My other bit of advice would be, if someone tells you they have the answer, they haven't. If they're asking you for money
I agree.
for them to tell you the answer, then run the other way.
I agree with you.
No one should be charging for information, in my opinion. Especially if they go through 45 minutes of absolute rubbish before they get to the information that
we are thinking of the same person.
Yeah. And they tell you the information, and you would have been better off researching it yourself on the internet and found it within 5 minutes and saved yourself, a super chat or whatever. But I see there's a lot of new people coming in, a lot of new people setting up podcasts and blogs, and that is brilliant that people are actually doing it and paying attention and showing an interest in this subject because of the UAPTF report, because of the New York Times articles, because of TTSA or Tom DeLonge or the Unidentified series or any other TV series which have been on recently, such as Contact or Project Blue Book. If people are getting an interest in it, then it's not going to be long until European governments will have to start acting the way the US government has and actually acknowledge this topic. And I think you've probably got a better grasp of this subject in France than anywhere else in Europe at the moment.
No.
Yeah.
No. It's just a picture you have from the 1970s. It has very changed since that time. But it's evolving. Let's say it's evolving. For example, the debate the UK had at the House of Lords, it's just impossible to see that in France at that time. So you can be very proud of your lords, to be honest, because they have cojones on that topic.
The best thing about that was the questions that were asked, because it showed, initiative on behalf of those lords to ask the questions, that they wanted that information. And obviously they've been asked by other people to ask those questions.
Mm-hmm.
But what we did see was, I can't remember her name now, but the minister who was the Baroness who was replying on behalf of the MOD, it was the same stock answers that have been churned out from Whitehall since 1952.
Yes,
no
but
significant defense threat.
To be honest, I think I don't know if they thought about it beforehand, but the fact that they all asked the same question and she had to repeat the same dumb answer was just marvelous. On a political level, just repeating the same empty sentence from the representative of the Ministry of Defense, it was just great to watch. I'm not sure it was the point of doing that, but it was great to watch.
Well, what I don't like at the moment is everyone's focusing on the threat narrative and looking at this from a defense point of view. I'm sure if the questions were worded from, can we look into this from a scientific point of view, with regards to propulsion methods, because these craft seem to be operating without any kind of combustion engine, any type of visible flume that we can see. Surely, if we looked at that, we could harness clean energy, which would be better for the planet as a whole. So why are we concentrating on the defense side of things when, surely the scientific investigation of the UAP is of more benefit to us especially at this, point in time.
And would that be a question for the Ministry of Defense? Do you have a Ministry of Advanced Science?
There is an advanced aerospace group, which is formed of different cross-party ministers, and we do have, the names of those ministers. It also includes various members of the House of Lords as well, and some of the British aerospace officials. So it is something that we are going to be looking at with UAP media, but for now, we just need to concentrate on breaking the public stigma as well, because I think that is still quite a heavy obstacle to this subject. Definitely.
Most of the population is still unaware of what is happening, and even in France, we have some mass media that started treating the subject, but we just have to respect what they achieved in the US, just hammering the subject every day with pictures. It's working. You realize that mass population in the United States starts to realize there is something behind it. It's just not fairy tales.
Yeah, they've got the television networks who are brave enough to actually discuss this subject on air as well. In the UK, we've got nothing. It'll be relegated to a footnote on a nighttime news show, or a Sunday afternoon TV magazine kind of show, where you just get people who don't know what they're talking about UAPs, and then making the odd joke at the end of it.
Yes. That's the same thing in France, to be honest.
Right.
We recently had the release of the UAPTF preliminary assessment. What's your take on it? What information or non-information did you find interesting?
The fact that out of 144 cases, they could only identify one, and it just happened to be a deflating weather balloon, I thought was highly ironic. The fact that they managed to find the balloon out of all those, especially with the whole 75 years of UAP reports, or UFO reports, since Kenneth Arnold in June 1947. That the only one they could identify was the weather balloon. I thought that was very funny, to be honest.
And it's a classified weather balloon.
Yeah. But what I do want to know is, like everybody wants to know, is how long is the classified annex? There's been varying reports of, it's 74 pages, and then someone else said, no, it's 400 pages, and apparently there's videos, which rival today's science fiction movies. So will we ever get to see those? Doubtful, unless there's, full declaration of the subject. But I can't see that happening until, we're facing some kind of unprecedented situation.
To be honest, I don't expect anything from the military or the intelligence community, because it's against their purpose. Just they are not made to share information. It's quite the opposite. They are made to protect information. The army in France is called the silent one. It's not in their DNA to share information. So I'm betting much more on the scientific aspect. There are several teams of very well-known scientists that are investigating full-time that topic. I think we will have a breakthrough on that side in the next year.
Yeah, it'd be nice as well to change the topic of conversation away from any potential threat narratives that are being shoved down our necks from, various disreputable sources at the moment. I think just the acknowledgement from the science community that, they're either close to figuring it out, or, they have been working on it and they kind of got a couple of ideas. It doesn't matter how many ideas they put forward. Just the fact that they are willing to put ideas forward, I think would be a huge bonus.
I agree. What are the future projects for Shadows of Your Mind?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the next issue's got Chase Kletsky as guest editor. She's very kindly decided to help. Well, very kindly agreed to help out on this issue, which
I will be more precise, because you talk about the next issue. When I read the vast articles there are, and really interesting one. I mean, it's documentary stuff. You just have to have a good voice reading out loud the article with just illustration, and you have just the perfect YouTube video.
It's
never thought about that.
I haven't thought about. I've thought about possibly doing an audio version of the magazine for people who haven't got time to read it or download a PDF, or so it'd be like, I don't know, almost the magazine in podcast form, where somebody would be reading out the articles. I mean, that could be a little boring.
No, I assure you will crush everything. Yeah, the public is in need of sturdy documentaries on the subject, and these articles are worthy, I can assure you, compared to anything I could read at the same level. You don't have challenges, to be honest. So
No,
I really think you could transform that into a media that is much more available, because, to be honest, most people just don't have time to read anymore. But they spend a lot of time in transport, where they can listen to a podcast or listen to a YouTube video or watch a YouTube video instead of a film when they go home. I think it's really a path you should look into, because you really have the hardest part and it is to have the best content possible.
Yeah. No, I mean, thanks for your words, Baptiste. You know, those, you know, when people say things like that about the magazine from somebody who's, you know, just producing this, and you know, I've never claimed to be a journalist or a writer or anything like that. I'm just a magazine designer who can string a couple of words together. But I have thought of creating a magazine app. How that would work at the moment, I'm still sketching out ideas. Because the biggest problem I found at the platforms I use, because I want the magazine to look like a high street newsstand magazine, you know, something you just pick up off the shelf. One of the reasons I don't print it is because it costs too much. Even if I did print
it's
on
very
demand.
expensive. On
Yeah.
that quality, it's awesome. It's
Yeah.
really nice. As an object, it would be just perfect.
It could be. Even print on demand is prohibitive because you get, you know, depending on the number of pages, one issue could be $5.99, the next issue is going to be like $9.99, $12.99, and you know what's, you know, not going to do that. One idea I did have is, well, along those lines, is to do a compilation of the first 10 issues. So just putting the best interviews all together in one place with all the best features, and then add some extra material to warrant it being available for purchase. Again, those ideas are still in a notebook somewhere. You know, it's just time at the end of the day as well, because I have a full-time job and I work on Phenomena magazine as well. So it's just finding time to do it. I need to clone myself to be able to do my full-time job so I can do this job. Or
I know the feeling. I know the feeling.
I need a magazine publisher to approach me to offer to pay me to do this magazine, you know, which would be great. But then, you know, that'd be kind of taken out of my hands a little bit. So you'd end up seeing adverts everywhere and, you know, various click-throughs. I mean, just for the publishing company to make money.
That's why I think you should just consider recording even by yourself. You don't need a voice actor to do that. Just take 1 hour a weekend, record your voice reading out loud one article, see how it feels, the rhythm you want to make inside of it, spread it to a couple of friends, check back what they think, and very simple, the idea will grow by itself. And I had the same problem at first, and it's just the first step that is a little bit hard because it's all new. But frankly, you already have the hardest part, which is the content. And once you have a very good content, and you have a very good content, all the rest is very simple. So it's my personal advice.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something I did think about and will probably investigate in the future, because I know the limitations of, you know, the aesthetic of a magazine is it's very difficult to read on a mobile, for example, or on a smartphone, because, you know, if I want the design to shine through, I have to sacrifice, you know, a potential audience that's looking at it on a mobile device. And vice versa, you know, if I just wanted it on a mobile device, then I'd have to sacrifice the design aesthetic, which is part of.
I completely agree.
Yeah,
I completely agree. Because for those who didn't ever produce a magazine, the physical aspect of what you're showing is part of the content you're proposing. It's just not the written text that is interesting, but the object in itself is in art, we consider it an art piece. It's the same equivalent of a painting. The material is part of the artwork. So you can't separate the two. That's why we consider it as an art form in itself. It's both text and pictures at the same time. That's why it's belonging together. So I perfectly understand that, and that's something you can overcome in a video. So you have the text that is written in audio, and you can use your graphics to illustrate what is shown. So it's a good balance between the two.
Yeah, that means I'll have to learn another skill as well.
You have the hardest part, which is the graphic design by itself. The animation is very simple once you already have the design. So sorry, I'm pushing ideas.
Oh no, you'll get full credit for it if it comes off. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dave, for coming. I was really wanting to push forward your magazine because it's become a personal reference of mine, and I'm very peculiar about the reference I use. So thank you very much for doing that work for free for everyone. All the links will be in the description below. If you have a word to conclude.
No, I just want to say thank you, Baptiste, for having me on. It's been a delight and an honor. And I just say, look out for the next couple of issues, because there's going to be, there's some big things in the pipeline, hopefully.
Sure.
Can't confirm anything yet, but there's going to be a couple of decent interviews, which, people might want to pay attention to.
It will be the occurrence, so we can meet each other again.
Yeah, definitely. Anytime.
Goodbye, Dave.
Goodbye. Thanks a lot, Baptiste.